Fantastic. Nice to meet you. I'm Thomas.
Hey, I'm Josh. Wonderful to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I was going to say your last name is Knobe?
Exactly.
Nope.
Yeah,
Okay.
everything is not pronounced.
Nope. Okay. Well, I'm so excited to have you here. When I heard I was gonna be interviewing you, I was very excited because you pretty much do what I wanted, philosophy and psychology. So
Oh,
yeah, I have a huge interest in the Knobe effect and a lot of the things that you've talked about in your ethical philosophical deliberations. I think it's really cool. Got some really good questions for you, but we can always just talk about um, what are you working on lately? What are you loving here recently? What's on your mind?
um, well, a lot of my recent work is concerned with people's ordinary notion of what it is to have a true self, like what you really are deep down inside. And so, yeah, a lot of people have been, wondering about this question, like, what does it mean to have a true self? Like, what's the real Thomas? And broadly speaking, I would guess you might think of like two different views about this. So, like, one kind of view that you might have that you see since figures like Plato or Aristotle is this idea that your true self is the thing that your reasoning draws you to. So, a lot of philosophers think, I don't know, say you have this really strong desire to, like, say, do heroin or something like that. But then when you reason about it, you think, I really shouldn't do that. Then the real Thomas, the real you, is the one that's drawing you. There's the reasoning that you do that when you think, oh, that's the wrong thing to do. And then if you do that, then you're showing your real self. But if you like give in to your instincts or you're just like this base desire to do this or something, then that's not the real you. But then other philosophers think the exact opposite. Like you might think, I don't know, in those moments where like you're feeling overcome with emotion and you're just, I don't know, you're crying and you're drunk or you're just too out of control to do whatever. Then in those moments, that's when the real you comes out.
Isn't that like the child inside that comes out when we're in those moments when we have
Oh
that
yeah.
vulnerability? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you might think that that child is the real you, not the. And then if you're reasoning in a way that doesn't allow the real you to come out, then then maybe that's not the real you. Anyway, so we're doing a lot of research about this. Do you just initially? I don't know. Do you have some thoughts? What do you think? What is the?
I don't know. I don't even know. I mean, like, I'm obsessed with the philosophy of mind and what self implies, self and how that deals with determinism and the shoehorning of free will into that argument. I mean, I can say a million things. A lot of the questions I'm going to ask are going to have to do with this. But what do I think myself, if I were to individuate myself here in front of everybody, I feel as though I am still that child that I was, but I'm also the reptilian parts of my brain that make me, you know, react certain ways with my sympathetic and non-sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And but you get into all this, and the self for me is like an introspective, like a mindful, meditative existence that's kind of intrapersonal to you. Does that make sense?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, so you're thinking, but you're thinking that the child in you is the real, is somehow who your real self
Well,
is.
it's when I say that I can't. It's more like a metaphor. I don't mean that I'm. I kind of say holding hands with my inner child, kind of thing. Then that's the person that I was programmed to be. That is what I kind of see as the real me that comes out when I'm really upset or when I'm really anxious or when I'm dealing with my bipolar or whatever. The child in me,
Mhm.
comes out. So
Oh, yeah. So I guess what we find a lot in our studies is that um, people's answer to this question about which of these things is the real you, your reasoning or your emotion, just depends on which one they think is, which one is leading them you toward whatever they think is the good thing. So people just seem to choose whatever they find good and think that that's your true self. So I don't know. I'll give you an example. So, like imagine this guy Mark, and he is traveling around the world, bringing to people this message that homosexuality is a sin, but you can be liberated from the sin through like the power of Jesus. And then suppose that Mark himself has this problem, which is that he himself is actually gay. And then he shares that with people, and he describes it as part of his own personal struggle. And he says, I know that I'm like drawn to do these things, but when I reason about it, I realize that that's wrong, and I just have to completely renounce that. And then participants in our study were asked, which of these is Mark's real self? Who's the real Mark? The part that is drawn to be with other men, or the part that thinks that's a sin? I don't know if you can feel it intuitively, but the result is that in this case where Mark's emotions are leading him in one direction and his beliefs are leading him in the other, then what we find is that the more liberal participants say his emotions are his real self, and the more conservative participants say that his beliefs are his real self.
Of
I don't know.
course. Of
So
course.
you get it. All right. And then in the other condition, we just switched everything. So in this condition, we say Mark is this person who travels the world bringing people this message that people of all sexual orientations should be treated equally. But then he himself faces this problem, which is that he's actually sometimes has these feelings of disgust toward gay people. He acknowledges that to everyone and describes it as part of his personal struggle. Then he just says, I feel this way at an emotional level, but when I reason about it, I realize that's wrong and I have to push it away from me. And now participants were asked which of these two things is really Mark's true self. The part of him that feels disgust, an emotion of disgust toward gay people, or the part that reasons about it
Mm.
and feels that's wrong. And then everything switched. Now the conservatives think it's his emotions, and the liberals think it's his reasoning.
We can't separate the feelings and the thoughts, though, right? I mean, they're all born of these psychological attitudes that are genetically inside of us, and the affectation. Anyway, you know all this, but that's that's a good example. I don't know. What do you think? What is Mark's real self?
Well, it seems like people's way of thinking about this question in our studies seems to be like really deeply evaluated. It doesn't seem like the true self is like a part of the self. Like your reasoning is this self, or your emotions are your true self. It seems like people think your true self is somehow like whatever is the good part of you.
Mm.
I don't know if we're right, but we're thinking maybe this is related to something much larger about how people think about things. That for many things, not just the self, they think that the essence of it is whatever is good about it. So if you ask like, what's the United States really all about? Or say you talk about some band that
Hmm.
released a number of different albums over many years, and you say, what is this band really all about? Maybe you would always choose whatever is good about it. If the band had a good part and a bad part, you think the part where they were really good, that was what revealed what this band's really all about.
Seems like such a cognitive bias, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you're right.
Yeah. I don't know. I was thinking. I don't have an answer to the Mark question.
Oh yeah.
I if he expresses that he is okay with, but he's still disgusted by it. I mean, he's being honest about it. I don't know. That's a conundrum that I can't answer. I'm not sure about that one.
Oh yeah.
Wow, really good one. Um, so the self is what you're working on. You're really focusing. I know you wrote a book just for everybody in the audience so that you can know. He wrote Experimental Philosophy. Um, it's how would you describe it? Go ahead and describe it. I won't read the Amazon
Well, I'm
description.
just the editor of it. Experimental philosophy is this new movement from a whole bunch of different people, and then this book isn't a book written by me in particular. It's a book written by lots of different people, each writing different things. Then we sort of brought them all together in this one volume to kind of give people a sense of what this new movement's all about.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm going to get into that. I'm going to look into it and see if I can't find some
Right.
excerpts. I'm not going to steal it. I promise I won't steal it. But no, so you're working very much in, like, you teach at Yale, right? You're a professor at Yale. Okay.
Mhm.
Do you in your spare time, do you really work on the philosophy of mind and trying to delineate what this self is? Is that what you're really focusing on right now, philosophically, psychologically?
Yeah, well, maybe philosophically and psychologically aren't that different from me, like that I'm working on issues that are at the intersection of these two things. And then, yeah, what we're trying to do is to understand how people ordinarily conceptualize these things. And then, like you said, that can connect in pretty interesting ways to questions about what's maybe really the right way of conceptualizing these things.
Okay, cool. Well, let's dive into some of these questions I had written down for you, because I'd love to. Can we explain? Of course, I wanted to ask you. Of course, what inspired you to explore the intersection of philosophy and psychology, and how have you seen it, like, evolve over the time that you've been a part of it? That's
Oh,
a
yeah.
good way. That's a
Well, when I was an undergraduate, I was really obsessed with philosophy, and I was, reading these figures like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Sartre and these older figures like
Mm,
Spinoza, Aristotle, and
hmm.
I just thought this was like the greatest thing that ever happened. But at the same time, I felt really alienated from academic philosophy, and I had this feeling like I don't know, I just don't want to become some like dried up figure in this ivory tower and so forth. And so then I graduated from undergrad, and then I just got like a bunch of random jobs. Like I was working for a long time with homeless people, and then while I was doing this, I would just keep writing uh, philosophy, like on the nights and weekends or whatever. And I sort of saw that as the essence of what I was doing. And then I also got it for a while. I was working, just doing psychology research. So I was just like writing these, doing this research in this lab, and like we were submitting it to these psychology journals and so forth. And I guess I thought of that as I don't know, just some way to pay the bills or something. And then I could explore this more central interest of mine, which was more philosophical. And then I was living that way for maybe I don't know, like 4 years or so. But then eventually, I just felt like this weird life I have of just doing all these random things is like kind of going nowhere. I have to like give it a try, go into academia. So I applied to grad school in philosophy with the thought that, I don't know, I was going to be continuing in this tradition of, I don't know, whatever Kierkegaard was about or something. So then I started doing that kind of stuff. But then maybe this is silly about me, but I felt really alienated from that too, because I started to feel like these people doing that sort of thing were just writing about those old figures. They weren't trying to,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I agree with you wholeheartedly.
So then started to develop this weird feeling that maybe the way to more do what those people were really doing, instead of writing about them, was to start working on this thing that I had considered to be, I don't know, just my day job or something, of just doing psychological research, of like running these studies about these kind of questions, but to answer these really traditional kind of questions in philosophy that I'd been concerned about, ever since I was a teenager. So then I started doing this weird thing that was kind of against the rules of philosophy at that time, which was like in the early 2000s. Of I would just try to run these experiments and then try to publish them as philosophy. But at least to me, it seemed like it was the continuation of like what philosophy had traditionally been.
Well, I say completely. So that's a beautiful story. Um, that's that's kind of how I had hoped that my life is going in different ways, but I would have probably because I started with philosophy, being obsessed in my early teens, and then I went to school for psychology, dropped out, went back later in my life, got a computer science degree, and then realized, hey, I'm obsessed with psychology and neuropsychology and neurobiology. Why am I so?
Oh,
But
wait,
go
can I
ahead.
ask? Are you
Yeah.
thinking of going back to school in neuroscience?
Right. Uh, yes, I do want to go back, but right now, I have bipolar type 1, so I
Mhm.
have a few issues with stress and anxiety.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, I don't mind sharing it with everybody, but I'm on a lot of medication, and I have psychiatrists that I have to go to all the time. So once
Okay.
that gets fixed in my life and maybe regulated enough, maybe I'll go back and chase that
Oh,
dream because I would love to do it. Yeah.
wait, that's wonderful. That would be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Absolutely. Let's go to another good question. Let's find. I had a bunch written down for you, so let me just explain this to the audience. Um, if I'm correct here, the Knobe effect, which refers to a phenomenon in which people's judgments about whether an action was intentional or unintentional depend on the moral valence or positivity or negativity of the action. So, for example, everybody in the audience, people are more likely to say that an action was intentional if it had a negative outcome than if it had a positive outcome, even if the actor's intentions were the same in both cases. You want to elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, sure. I'll just give you guys a simple example. So here's an example of this effect. Suppose that the vice president of a company goes to the chairman of the board, and the vice president says, "Okay, we've got this new policy. It's going to make huge amounts of money for the company, but it's also going to harm the environment." And the chairman of the board says, "Look, I don't care at all about harming the environment. I just want to make as much money as we possibly can. So let's implement the policy." So then they implement the policy, and sure enough, it ends up harming the environment. And then participants are just asked the question, did the chairman of the board harm the environment intentionally, like on purpose? And in that case, the vast majority of people say yes, like just clearly he did it on purpose. And if you ask people, why do you think that? They just say, well, it's because he knew that he was going to be harming the environment and he went ahead and did it anyway. But we thought that maybe there's something more going on here, that it's not just about what's going on inside the chairman's mind. It's about something about the moral status of what he's doing, that you think harming the environment is something bad. So to see that that's right, just consider what happens when we change the word harm to help. So we're just going to keep everything the same, all aspects of the story the same. We're just changing the word harm to help. Okay, here it is. The vice president of the company goes to the chairman of the board, and he says, "Look, we've got this new policy, and it's going to make huge amounts of money for our company, and it's also going to help the environment." And the chairman of the board says, "Look, I know it's going to help the environment, but I don't care at all about that. All I care about is just making as much money for our company as we possibly can. So let's implement the policy." So they implement the policy, and then sure enough, it ends up helping the environment. Did he help the environment intentionally? And in that case, most people say no, he didn't help the environment intentionally. But these might seem very puzzling because the difference between these two things is just whether he's harming the environment doing something bad or helping the environment doing something good. But you might think that difference, the difference between bad things and good things, shouldn't be at all relevant to whether the thing he's doing is intentional or unintentional.
Right. It doesn't matter either way. But the second outcome is like an accidental outcome, right? It could be seen as accidental. Whereas the first, most people, okay, it's a negative thing, you're going to assume immediately that it was intentional. Is that the data that you're getting?
Yeah, exactly. That people say in the first case that it's intentional, and in the second case that it's unintentional, even though the only difference is in something moral about whether it's good or something bad. They don't differ in any of the non-moral qualities about them.
Mm, gotcha. Okay. Well, that's pretty much in a nutshell for everybody. This, by the way, will be going up on YouTube for everybody. I just wanted to let you know this will be on YouTube for everybody to see in the end, and so lots of people will get to see us talk about this, and I think that's fun.
Cool.
I'm having so much fun. Let's ask this one. How do cultural differences influence the way people make judgments about moral character and intentionality?
You know, that's a great question, and the answer isn't fully known. But there was a really interesting study a number of years ago from this project called Mini Labs. And what Mini Labs does is it, it, it runs the exact same study in all different labs. So, say I'd be running the study, and then someone in Saudi Arabia is running the study, and then someone in Rwanda is running the study, and someone in Tokyo is running the study. And it's the exact same study, but just being run all throughout the world.
Hmm.
And then for almost all of the different effects that they studied, what they found is that that doesn't matter. Pretty much people behave the same way across all of these different cultures.
Yeah.
But on cases like the one that I just described to you about the CEO who harms or helps the environment, that wasn't the result. It was different. And then there's clearly something going on there. People aren't showing the same effect in every place. And then the key question is why? What is the relevant difference? And then, to be honest, a lot of people don't know. There's been one really interesting study about it from like Jason Shepard, and what that study found was that different cultures have different feelings about authority. Like, for example, about someone who's like the CEO of a company, and or the mayor of the town or something like that. And if someone's very high in authority, certain cultures will be very reluctant to say bad things about that person, and other cultures will be happy to say bad things, even about people who are very high in authority. And so then it might be that that's the key difference, but it really isn't very well understood. It really is like this quite striking thing that we know that something different is going on. It's not like everyone's responding the same way, but also we don't know exactly why. Like, what is the relevant difference?
Mm. This seems like a combinatorial explosion of variables here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. So you're seeing like if you could just thought each variable has like its own additive effect, and you could study each of them separately. But if you thought there are 10 different variables that would be interested in studying, but you thought each of them could interact with each other, then
Yeah.
you have 1,024 possible pairs of attractions. Then things start to get really difficult. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The excellent answer. So let's go to my next ones. I have a lot of good ones here because I took some time to try to make some good ones for you, so we could entertain ourselves. All right, let's see. Let's go to what I mentioned earlier. I said the D word, determinism, right? So I'm going to ask you, because I asked this to a lot of people who do ethical philosophy and things like that. How do your findings on moral judgment, I guess, within the self and decision making inform our understanding of, free will, determinism, indeterminism, all that?
Yeah. So there's clearly a sense in which people find this question confusing. So if you go into a classroom and you just present people with this problem about the problem of free will and determinism, people don't think the answer is obvious. They just feel confused, right? Some people feel like this is a really difficult problem. I sort of feel drawn in one way and I sort of feel drawn in another way, and I don't know what to think about it. And so our research on that question has been concerned with the question, why? Why is it confusing? So there seems like there's something in people drawing them toward the view, for example, that we can't have free will even if everything's determined, and other people drawing them, something else drawing people toward the view that we can't. What's drawing people in either of those directions? And then, my colleagues and I, but also the field as a whole, has really made like a lot of progress on this question. I'm like, what's the confusion? And the way we started out of trying to explore it was by looking at different ways of kind of presenting the problem and asking whether people give different answers depending on how you present it. So in particular, we looked at what happens if you present it in an abstract way versus in a concrete way. So in our study, we said, so sorry,
No,
imagine
you're fine. You're fine.
imagine this universe, we'll call it universe A. And in universe A, everything is just completely determined. So everything that happens was completely determined by the thing that happened before it, which was determined by the thing that happened before that, and so forth, all the way back to the beginning of the universe. And then in the abstract condition, oh, so sorry, we just asked people, so consider this universe, universe A. In universe A, can anyone ever be morally responsible for anything they do? And in that condition, participants overwhelmingly said no. No one in this universe can ever be responsible for anything they do. But then we also had another condition, this concrete condition. In the concrete condition, we didn't just ask people this abstract question. Instead, we asked them a question about a concrete individual person. So participants in this story were told, imagine this universe, universe A, and they were told the exact same thing. It's completely deterministic. Everything that happens is completely caused by the thing that happened before that, which was caused by the thing before they happened that. Now let's imagine one particular person in this universe. He falls in love with his secretary, so he decides to leave his wife and children. And then to do that, he decides to kill them both. So he sets up an incendiary device that burns both his wife and child to death. Now, is that one person in the deterministic universe, morally responsible for what he did? And in that condition, people overwhelmingly say yes. So they're saying in the abstract that no one in universe A can ever be morally responsible for anything they do, but they're also saying in that concrete that this one guy in universe A can be morally responsible for the thing he does. Yeah. So somehow, I mean, it feels like if we're trying to get at what is confusing about this case, it feels like maybe what's confusing about it is somehow the ways in which our abstract and concrete judgments are different. That at the abstract level, we're pushed toward one kind of judgment, but when we start to think concretely about particular individuals, we're pushed in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah. So concretely, we want to say free will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the abstract, I mean, I kind of causal determinism, or the nomological determinism, where physics has determined everything since the Big Bang, every neuron firing, all that. That's hard to argue against, but free will is not something that we can just ignore, I don't think. And the argument between the determinism and indeterminism are both unsatisfactory, but I still act as though Christopher Hitchens has a really good quote. He says, I act as though I have free will because I have no choice. So but yeah, that was just a funny little tangent to get on. If you had to place a bet, I'm sure you know about compatibilism and foundherentism and foundationalism and all that kind of stuff. What would you bet? Would you bet some slightly determined universe with the illusion of free will, or would you say that you're compatibilist and that free will can exist in a determined universe? I mean, you gave a great example with universe A, and is the person morally culpable? That's the biggest question of all right there, and that's got me thinking.
I'd be very reluctant to place a bet because I find the question very confusing myself. And
Mm-hmm.
then And in part, I'm confused about that very last issue that you raised. So, not just the question, is our universe deterministic, but the question, does whether it's deterministic matter for whether we have free will?
Hmm.
So, some philosophers think if the universe is completely determined, then we can't have free will. These things can't both be true. But other philosophers think the opposite. They think if you really understand what it is for something to be determined, then then you start to recognize that both of these things can be true. It could be determined, and we could have free will. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, a helpful way of thinking about that, like you just said, first it might start to seem puzzling, is this idea that you might think, well, what is it determined by? What are your actions determined by? And then you might think, well, they could be determined by your own deepest beliefs and values. So then, in that sense, they're determined. It's completely predictable what you would do if only you could have a good enough understanding of exactly what the prior situation was. But it's not
Hmm.
determined by something outside of you. The path of determinism was running through you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a biological determinism. I mean, in that sense, guess you could say that's a little bit more evolutionary, but yeah, the metaphor is apt, I think. But no, that's God, you explained it beautifully. I mean, I don't know the answer either, but it sounds like as though, compatibilism is this having your cake and eating it too. Well, free will doesn't bother determinism. We can still have free will. It may or may not be an illusion, but it's still there and we should still consider it, especially since we have moral judgments to make, kind of thing. That's what a compatibilist would say. So I don't know. I
But
don't know the answer.
when you say that you don't know, I really feel like that state of not knowing, it feels like it's this really fundamental one, that it's not just that you happen not to know, that there's something about this question that our um our minds, the whole way we think about things, is kind of pulling us in opposite directions with regard to it.
Mm,
So you asked earlier about what happens when you ask questions in different cultures. And when you ask this question across all different cultures, what you find is that there's no difference across cultures in judgments about the relationship between determinism and free will. And what all different cultures are showing is this exact same pattern, which is that people are just really confused. They really find the question really confusing, and they find it super confusing here in the United States, but also incredibly confusing in Asia and Africa and like throughout the world. People are just finding this to
yeah.
be a terribly confusing question. So I think there's something really fundamental in this confusion. It's not just a confusion that you say some of us happen to have because we've studied philosophy or something like that.
Right. We want. I mean, I would say that most of the world wants some form of. Well, I don't want to paint the world with a broad brush, but moral justice, and that would require at least some notion of free will, I assume. But I don't know. I don't know. That's a hard one. I can't. I have cognitive dissonance about free will and determinism all the time because I'm like, oh no, wait, it is this way. It is set, but we don't know everything about the laws of physics, so maybe it is behavioral and also linguistic and all these other
Yeah,
constructs.
so definitely people are drawn to this sense of justice, and that's like a really important aspect of ourselves. But then philosophers who are opposed to the idea that there is free will, they think that we have to get beyond that. That if we could see people in this way as they really are, for example, as determined, then instead of being angry at them and trying to punish them and harm them for the things that they do, then we recognize that the things they do are just the inevitable result of like these their genes and their environment and like these forces around them. We come to a deeper understanding of them, then we could kind of try to work things out. It might seem weird to think about that when you're thinking about things like actual criminal behavior or something like that. But if you
Yeah,
start
yeah,
to think about it within your own life, I don't know, within your family, dealing with your friends and so forth, you can start to see how maybe if you start to think of things in that way, it would it would transform your life, but maybe in a really good way. That instead of trying to be like seeking justice against those who wronged you, maybe you start to think like, I don't know, I can kind of understand why people did this stuff.
yeah. Exactly. You would. I in a perfect society, of course, this is idealistic, but would want rehabilitation, not retribution. Or I mean, justice is such a very vague term because justice might mean rehabilitation. But yes, I'm more for the rehabilitation side of it. Uh, except save for the few individuals that we can't help, like antisocial personality disorders and stuff like that. But um, Yeah, no, I'm stuck at the same place you are. Let's so I'm absolutely loving this, but I don't want to keep you too long. How long do you have with us?
I don't know.
You're
Maybe.
you're more than welcome to stay as long as you want. I'll talk to you for hours. I love this. This stuff is so good to me. Um,
How long does it usually last?
yeah, you just
Oh,
let me know. What's that?
how long does it usually last?
About an hour, hour and 30 minutes,
Okay,
somewhere in
good.
there. Yeah,
Yeah,
you,
an hour
you
sounds
just
good.
know. You just let me know, my friend, and we'll start wrapping it up. But no, I've got a few more questions for you because they're good ones. I think anyway. It took me a little while to get them together. But then we also have one of my best friends here. His name is Perry, and after I ask this last couple of questions, I'm going to get him in here to talk to you because he's a philosophy nerd like me, and I'm sure he's been paying attention to this, so he'll have some good things to add. Absolutely. So let's go down to what. Okay, let's delineate here. Let's delineate this self and consciousness. Delineate those two for me.
Well, let's just talk about what consciousness is. I mean, so a lot of times when philosophers talk about consciousness, what they mean is this feeling that certain states seem to have this special quality that's kind of feels like there's something it's like to be in that state. So maybe at this moment, as we're talking, like you know that 7 plus 5 is 12, but there's nothing it feels like to know that 7 plus 5 is 12.
Yeah,
You
you
just
don't have the experience of like the essence of the numbers being 12, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's some really different kind of thing that happens when, for example, you're if something pricked you, then you feel like this pain, and then you actually feel it. There's like the distinctive experience of feeling the pain. Or if you're looking at your screen and your screen is white, there's that experience of like seeing the white in front of you. Or even if you're not looking at the screen, maybe you could just close your eyes and then you could just imagine a white screen and you could have this experience. It's something really different from just being in a state like knowing something. That it's just something it's like to kind of see this, have this experience of imagining white
Are
in
you
front of
familiar with Mary's room?
you. Of
I
course,
know
yeah.
you are. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Everybody in the audience, go look up Mary's room. It's the experiment on qualia, and it's what we're talking about. It's the experience of experiencing. It is not just seeing the color red, but the experience of the color red, if that makes sense. I'm sure Dr. No or a professor can expound upon that.
You can call me Josh. But so
Josh, sorry.
yeah. Well, so this question about consciousness is a tremendously important one. And I don't know that we've been really interested in how people ordinarily think of it. One thing we are interested in, for example, is what's the difference between how people think about individuals and how they think of groups like Amazon or something, like the corporation. So then if you're thinking about Amazon, it seems like there are a lot of different kinds of things that sound like mental states that you could attribute to Amazon. Like you could say, Amazon intends to release a new product in July, or Amazon thinks that OpenAI is one of its main competitors, or Amazon is trying its best to decrease corporate federal regulation in its corporate activities, or something.
So
All
like like an anthropomorphization of the company. Is that what you mean?
yeah, maybe it's an anthropomorphization, but you can certainly attribute lots of mental states to it. But then it seems like it's this thing in particular that we've been talking about that you can't attribute to Amazon. So you can't say Amazon is feeling depressed. Amazon, Amazon is feeling happy. Amazon
Yeah.
is like vividly imagining a purple square. Uh, all of these states, that these special kinds of states that we've been talking about that involve consciousness, where there's really something it feels like to be in them, then it seems like maybe there's nothing it feels like to be Amazon. So Amazon seems like it can have a lot of mental states, but it can't have those. And then people
That's
seem to
crazy.
they seem to show that same thing toward robots or computers, that they think, like a chess program could be like trying to control the center of the board, or it could believe that it's gonna mate in three or something. But the chess program can't be like feeling happy.
No, no, it can't. That's so, that 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 example you gave just a second ago. What did you say?
Oh, about what chess programs can do or what Amazon can do.
What Amazon? The fact that they can have mental states.
Oh, yeah.
Explain a mental state of a corporation to us.
Oh yeah, well, it's a really it's a funny thing. Like people do seem to say these things. Like they say, Amazon is Amazon knows um, this, certain kind of information. Amazon knows your social security number or something.
Yeah, yeah,
But then you might think, like, in what sense could Amazon know something? You might think, like, you could know something because you're a human being, but how could Amazon know it? But then you might start to think, well, why not? Like, you are sort of made up of all these little neurons, and Amazon is made up of these different like committees and departments that are like sending emails to each other and so forth. But what's special about neurons sending messages through synapses as opposed to departments sending messages through
yeah,
email?
yeah.
Why can't Amazon have a mental state? But some people sort of think, well, surely it doesn't really know anything or really believe anything. But it does feel like people are willing to say stuff like that.
Does the government treat corporations as though they are entities that are agents, or do
Well,
you know about that?
this is a little above my pay grade. Like, I'm not a lawyer,
Yeah,
but there, I mean, there is in criminal law, there's this notion of mens rea that you have to have the relevant kind of mental state in order to commit a crime, and then there are corporate crimes. So a corporation can itself be guilty of a crime, and so then in order for the corporation to be guilty of the crime, the corporation, in some sense, has to have the relevant mental state, which is called corporate scienter. So, in other words, like Amazon could be guilty of a crime, but only if Amazon knew what it was doing. But so, in some sense, Amazon has to be able to know what it's doing.
that sounds like room for infinite loopholes, doesn't it?
Well, people in the law, people often say that what it is for Amazon to know something is in some way for someone in a certain position of in the management of Amazon to know it. Like
Hmm.
that, Amazon could know something if the CEO of Amazon knows it. But in people's ordinary judgments, I think people think corporations can know things even if no one in the corporation knows them. Like you could say that NASA knows how to build a space shuttle, even if no one in NASA knows how to build
Yeah,
this.
yeah, and you could say NASA has an identity, like a mental state. I would guess. NASA is space. NASA has the ethos of space and space exploration. Um,
Oh,
and
and that's no one's identity. It's just the identity of Amazon.
or yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
NASA
yeah.
or Amazon, whichever one we were talking about. I can't remember now. I
Oh,
got
right.
mixed up.
So then um, NASA has these goals, but they don't have to be the goals of any people in NASA. They're just like the
Right,
goals of NASA. Or
right,
NASA is
exactly.
central to its identity, but they don't have to be the goals, the things that are central to the identity of the people who are in NASA.
Is it the socially constructed nature of all the intersubjectivity of the people that forms that ethos of NASA?
Yeah, maybe it is. Like it feels like say you and your friends were like I don't know, say you formed a band, and then you and your friends also those same friends formed a bowling team. So it's the same friends, it's like the same people. But then you could still say that the key goal of the band is to play music, and the key goal of the bowling team is to win bowling matches, even though the actual people in them are completely the same. And then you might say, like, the band isn't at all concerned with like bowling, and the bowling team isn't at all concerned with playing music, even though all the people in the bowling team are trying to play music, and all the people in the band are trying to do bowling.
I like that.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I get it. All right, one more question, then I'm gonna let Perry in because I got people chomping at the bit.
awesome.
Actually, I'm gonna check. Perry, are you with me, brother?
Yep, I came in about 15 minutes ago,
Okay. Well,
and
you
I've been
haven't.
listening.
We've been having a really good time. I want you to throw your 2 cents in here. Come on in.
Sure. So, yeah, I jumped in around the free will portion,
Yeah.
and recently I've been talking to a few friends about free will. It it is probably a result of my radical skepticism because I'm not convinced of much, but I have trouble with things such as compatibilism. Um, Not sure what that means necessarily. I'm not sure the exact linguistics that go behind it to properly explain what compatibilism is. And as you said, it perhaps is just like a case of having your cake and eating it too, which I always have a problem with. Um,
It's some form of cognitive dissonance there between you and me with the free will and the determinism. The compatibilism is the one that a lot of people take because if you're a scientist, you know the laws of physics are uniform since the Big Bang. So you're like, okay, everything, all the neuronal firings, everything's the same, it's determined. But then you can't ignore free will. And me and Josh, were getting into that. And what do you think, Perry?
well,
A good question for Josh or anything?
yeah, I will, and I think it was appropriate that, or good for me at least, that we kind of stepped into consciousness. I do want to know if there is a distinction between the self or the I and consciousness, what that may be. Because first, as a basis, I think we have to have an I or a self in order to have free will, if that's a thing. I'm not even convinced of what the self is. I mean, it's like how you said with Christopher Hitchens, I don't have a choice but to have free will. It's a very pragmatic use of free will that I use. I mean, I'm not just going to not do anything and just lay in bed all day, right? I'm going to be pragmatic and useful, go to work, go to the gym, do these things I feel as though I am choosing to do. I guess perhaps a good question may be one, what is the distinction between the self and consciousness, if there is
See, that's
one?
what we were getting into right a minute ago. It might have been right before you joined, but I asked him what was the difference between self and consciousness, and I got him off on a tangent and interrupted him. So let's see what
Yeah.
Josh
So
has.
yeah, what's your idea about that, Josh? Nice to meet you, by the way.
Great to meet you, Perry. Well, one way in which most people think about consciousness is that when you're conscious of something, it's something that you know that you have. Like, so your conscious beliefs are the beliefs you know you have, and your conscious desires are the desires you know you have, and so forth. Or at least that you couldn't, it couldn't possibly be that you're conscious of them, but you have no idea you have them. This thing that I was interested in about the self was like this question: what's sort of like the core of yourself, who you really are, or something. And then a really interesting question arises about the relationship between that and consciousness. So consider the parts of you that you don't even know you have. Are those like the are those less or more like the realist parts of yourself? And I don't know, it's a really interesting question. Sometimes I think it might be the opposite way that the parts of you that you don't even know you have are the parts that are people will see as the most core to who you truly are.
Hmm.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big. I read a lot about Schopenhauer, and Freud was very influenced by Schopenhauer and the unconscious and stuff like that. Me, myself, is not the same person that I was yesterday. Radically different than the person I was 2 years ago. Radically different than I was when I was a baby. And it seems like this flux and ever-changing
Heraclitean
self,
flow.
it almost like it almost just makes the whole idea of self trivial and silly to me. Um, and I think that all of these external and internal forces, I mean, I'm 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 not sure where to distinguish myself from the noumena in the outside world. I think that I'm a part of that, and that external forces or the capital W will is what's driving everything in reality.
Well, that's a good question, Josh. What do you think about replacing maybe not free will, not libertarian free will? I can fly and all this shit, but will, just will in general. What do you think about will?
Well, Perry's talking about this thing from Schopenhauer, but you mean just the very idea of
Well, yeah,
having.
we could talk about the Schopenhauerian will if you want to. Do you see any benefit in
Well,
that?
wait, but sorry, the thing you're talking about is like forgetting about whether you have a free will. Like, do you even have a will?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the even the most little sliver of will, I'm willing to look at the evidence for and be convinced of. I've just yet to see where that sliver of will may be.
Well, let's talk about the kind of question that Perry was talking about like the part of you that's conscious and whether that's more truly a part of yourself or not. So, I don't know, suppose you're thinking about like what to study in school or something. And then you reflect on what you want to study, and then you're like, I'm computer science, and then you're very conscious about it. You can say exactly why, like these are the reasons. And now suppose, I don't know, there's just something in you that's drawing you toward philosophy. You don't even know what it is. You don't have any conscious access to it. It's somehow completely outside of your conscious awareness, and you're just like, okay, I have to focus. I have to sit here and like do this computer science stuff. And there you are. You're like opening, you're like reading Schopenhauer or something. You're like, I've got to stop this. I have to like throw this Schopenhauer out. And then you don't even understand why you're doing this or something. Then in that type of case, at least I have the intuition, it feels like whatever is the conscious reasoning that you're going through feels like less who you really are than the non-conscious one. The, the non-conscious one, almost in virtue of it not being conscious, starts to seem more real.
Absolutely, yeah, I would agree with that. Um, Again, that consciousness, and it sounds like almost you're distinguishing consciousness from the unconscious, which I'm willing to tackle. I just again don't know where do they mesh together? Do they blend in? Is it all just one thing, or are they? Is it a dual, a property, a dualistic property between the two somehow, where we obtain, power and control over the unconscious at some point, and it turns into our ego? Whatever terminology you want to use, with that, it definitely seems like, without any other information that I've been exposed to in terms of mainly philosophy. I'm a very novice psychologist. I don't know much, comparatively speaking, amongst my friends in terms of psychology. So, the unconscious and conscious I use mainly as a philosophical notion. Um, I just really find it. I mean, if I weren't exposed to all of that I have been, I'd be like, oh yeah, I have free will. Like, I chose to eat this salad instead of, this cookie, or vice versa, whatever the case may be. Um, it just seems as though at the very foundation of it, there was already something. And Dalsu mentioned determinism and free will aren't opposites. I would agree, but it's still worth considering the determinate and indeterminate properties of reality that we live in and how they affect us, and where is it that we aren't abiding by those external factors. Schopenhauer thought we had free will. He had a book, The Freedom on the Will, or something like that, and I read it briefly, and I only saw flaws with it personally.
So you're looking for the sliver of will. Like, I mean, obviously we want, like, I'm sure Josh would probably agree. We would like to see the neurological representation of what will would look like, right? Is that where you're rolling towards?
That's what I'm trying to figure out, if that's a charitable avenue to go down.
Okay. What
Um,
do you think, Josh? That's
Um,
a lot. I know that's a lot. I just wanted to. We always have these philosophical ruminations that we go through over and over and over again. So
yeah, I don't know what the answer to this kind of question is going to be. I mean, there's been an enormous amount of work about this question. For example, is there a neural correlate of consciousness? And I don't know, the jury's still out. It feels very uncertain. I don't know. So, in our final minutes, is there something we want to do to kind of like bring everything together?
we can talk about. Um, oh, what else was I gonna? Did you need? Because we're about 54 minutes. We don't have any callers right now, but we will. We'll keep it open for another 5 or 10 minutes. Is that okay? Another 5 or 10 minutes, Josh? Would that be all right?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So let's. I guess I want to read a little bit just so that um, because I found a good summary of your ideas, and I was just going to read to people, you know, his. Okay, so Josh's research focuses on the ways in which people make judgments about the intentions and moral character of others, and how these judgments are influenced by a variety of factors, including cultural background, social norms, and individual differences in personality and cognitive style, like we've been talking about. We've also covered consciousness a lot, but I want to ask Joshua one last thing about I don't want to ask the biggest question in the world, what is consciousness? But you kind of answered for me what the difference between the self and consciousness was. But what can we take away from this? Let's say this conversation has been indirectly about consciousness. What can we take away from what consciousness is?
Well, what I've been researching is what people think consciousness is. And then you might think that's sort of related to the question of what consciousness is. But in any case, it's certainly something. It's a question about what people think consciousness is. And then we seem to be discovering something really interesting about it. Like, so people seem to think that you can have consciousness, but that, say, a robot who acts like you can't have consciousness, a corporation can't have consciousness. And then people seem to think about these other things, that these things, they can't have consciousness, so they can't feel something, they can't really experience anything. But they can have states like believing things, they can have states like intending things, like wanting things, and so forth. There's this one special thing they can't have. They can't have consciousness, and it's these states that can't, like things like these entities that can't, things like robots and corporations and so forth. We don't really know what's going on, but a lot of what we've been thinking is that maybe there's some connection between how people think about consciousness and our embodiment. That a really striking thing about you is that people see you as embodied, as having a biological body. And then if someone created like Robo Thomas that was exactly like you in almost all ways, but was not biological, just this metal thing, and then you could talk with it, you could discuss nihilism or whatever it is that you've been
Right.
wondering about, it would say all the same things that you say. But even though it would say all the same things that you say, it would be unembodied in the sense of not biological, just be
Yeah.
metal.
No experience. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that people would think that Robo Thomas was capable of reasoning and really capable of thinking and so forth. But then at the same time, they think somehow Robo Thomas is different from Thomas, and the difference is consciousness. That Robo Thomas, there's nothing it's like to be Robo Thomas. Doesn't feel anything. And then people would think, as a result, for example, that we don't have to care what happens to Robo Thomas. Like, if it just would be helpful or more convenient for us to just throw it over a bridge or something like that, then there's nothing bad about that because it doesn't really feel anything.
Mm.
Of course, it can still think things, it can still know things, it can still intend things, but it doesn't have this one thing. It doesn't have the consciousness, it doesn't have the ability to actually experience anything. And it seems like maybe our ordinary notion of consciousness, maybe it's really wrapped up in this fundamental way with the body.
Mm. Mm. I think we are our body. I really do. I think consciousness, just for my part, to finalize this, and I have a notion, and I don't believe this absolutely, but I have a notion that the brain is like the hardware and the mind is like the operating system, and somewhere in the internet of our introverse is consciousness. It's like a some form of emergent property of the complexities of the networks and the connections between the synapses and stuff. I don't know that, but it makes sense to me. It's something I can grab onto a little bit and have some kind of mental model to represent it to myself. So what do you think? Does
Wait,
that
that's
does that
nice. And maybe,
Yeah.
maybe you think that things like just reasoning and knowing things and intending things, maybe those are just in the software.
Yes.
But consciousness isn't just in the software. It's somehow really, some people's way of understanding is that it's really related to the hardware. Something else that had the same software but very different hardware, people would think it can still reason in the same way that you do, but it can't have consciousness in the way that you do.
Yes. Perfect way to end this. Well, I've it's at the we're at the hour mark, so I won't hold you too long. I I love you, man. I love talking to you. I really appreciate you coming and hanging out with us. I want you to do it again if you ever have some time. Come by and we'll have another good conversation and have some fun.
Thanks,
Sure,
Uh,
Josh.
it's great talking with you.
yeah, really good talking to you. Thank you so much, man.
All right, bye bye.
All right, bye bye. All right, guys. Thank you to Professor Josh, everyone, for he's a great person, great man. We are going to go ahead and end the episode now. Everybody, please subscribe to the Pangburn Hangout. Please come and join us on Discord, and please be looking on YouTube on Pangburn YouTube, and also on my channel, Thomas Spanner's channel, for this episode to be uploaded very soon. So everybody, we love you. Thank you. Have a good evening.